most shocking thing that I've heard this afternoon, and you know, I've been doing this kind of work for 50 years, was the idea that you might actually be looking at 0.1 to 0.2 as a level. We know that the science tells us that what should be supposedly protective of people for 40 years, for a 40-hour work week, for 8 hours a day, which they thought 0.1 would do, doesn't do it. And to talk about environmental exposures at that level, we know literally at that level, I mean, we have many documents looking at levels that increase asbestos risk. That level, 0.1, for 1 year, raises your risk of mesothelioma 4 times. And so how anybody could begin to think about that, at least in Europe, they go 1 more 0, it's 0.01. And even they're looking at that to think about lowering that. 001. So how in heaven's name we could even be contemplating something like that is beyond me. I was wondering if you might just comment on that further, how anybody in their right mind could think about that.
There's a number of things to say, but without taking too much of Linda's time, this is an OSHA, okay? OSHA, this is not an EPA thing. Let's make that clear. EPA is about management, OSHA's actions, okay? What people don't remember, when you read a regulation, there's 3 parts to a regulation, a thing called a preamble, the body of the regulation itself, and then appendix. You know where you get all this information? It's called the preamble, but nobody reads them. I do, because I'm that kind of guy. But the fact remains is, in OSHA's own preamble, they tell us we're not safe at 0.1. And I'm sorry, Arthur, I don't remember the exact numbers. It's like 4.3 for 1,000 or something like that. Yeah. So here's the thing, guys. Asbestos, as far as I know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, asbestos, as far as I know, is the only thing that uses fibers per cubic centimeter. Everything else in OSHA is fibers per cubic meter, okay? Cubic meter, 39 inches on the side, okay? He could fit in there. I was saying to him at lunch when we both get reincarnated, I want to be 6'3", and he'll have hair. This guy laughing, he's the tall one. No, but the thing is, guys, 0.1 fibers per cubic centimeter is the same thing as saying 100,000 fibers per cubic meter. We use a clearance standard at the end of removal projects that they shouldn't be using it at all anymore by what we call phase contrast, 0.01. Oh, that's just 10,000 fibers per cubic meter, sort of magnitude. We have a thing called transmission electron microscopy, or TEM, for clearance that we develop for schools. I am pushing to make that mandatory federally for all projects over a certain size. And I will continue to do that. Phase contrast is a farce outside of maybe doing personal monitoring in an abatement area. Or that's PLM there. That works fine for that. Does that help?
Just one last question. I think one of the most frustrating things for most of us, especially those of us who had family members who have suffered from asbestos disease directly, is to understand what is the tipping point for legacy. And when you mentioned, Tom, that we don't know, if we're not measuring, like we don't know what we don't know. So if we don't know when we're supposed to abate, and I know this is what your whole job is focused on, Brent, how do we know when we're working in crumbling school buildings and places that you were mentioning where the roofs are really nearly caving in on top of folks with toxic asbestos rain, essentially? Where do we start?
Yeah, so great question. And what I would say to you, and I said it during my presentation, we have regulations on the books that theoretically should resolve that concern you have, but they have to be enforced. So the regulations say before you disturb a material that might contain asbestos, we first have to sample it and determine out, does it have asbestos or does it not? But it's not enforced. Tom just said a minute ago, think AHERA, that's the Asbestos in Schools rule, and that is there's a requirement to inspect all schools for the presence of asbestos. Should we extend that out to inspect all public commercial buildings for asbestos? Be a giant undertaking, but that's the way we could assure it's done instead of relying on the process of a renovation or a demolition that might disturb. One piece of good news in there are a lot of jurisdictions now that when you go to apply for a permit for a renovation or demolition are saying first, show me your asbestos survey before I'll give you the permit. And that's going to go a long way to solving that problem.
One real quick thing, I've advised the Philly reporters when they wrote those articles, and I've trained a lot of reporters. And what I have found with reporters, I've worked in semi-public sector for my whole career. Reporters get assignments, and they don't know what the questions are to ask. So what I've done over the years with reporters is say, take me off the record and let me teach you some things. And they're grateful, because most of them have no clue, they have no idea how where to look. They will not be able to read a 2-column Federal Register in 7 pica font. So I gave it to them. And as a matter of fact, I've taken the regulations and put them in Microsoft Word and highlighted the good stuff. And I send that to them. Schools. Here's the one thing with the lady in the schools in Philadelphia. Nothing was what was called significantly damaged. Then you have damage, then you got good, right? So significantly damaged, we dealt with a lot of that already. Most. Not in Mississippi, but elsewhere. Hers was damaged, and she went back and did 3 management plans, which you have to do every 3 years, 9 years, and she went to multiple schools to find this stuff. I give her credit. This is the most informed reporter I've ever worked with. And she says, well, we got this moderate. I said, okay. In here it says it has to be addressed in a timely fashion. So that was the question she laid on me that I started getting nervous about. What's a timely fashion? As a matter of fact, after that, I spent 3 days digging through every Federal Register I could find around a HERA to see if they ever talked about what a timely fashion meant, and they never did. So you know what? Enforcement. There is no enforcement. OSHA, guys, if you think people call up OSHA, like I saw the lawyer, okay, this is a professional man, he sees something going wrong, and a lawyer calls OSHA, you think they're going to respond? Absolutely not. I don't care who you are. The only person that's going to respond to is if a worker from the job site specifically files a complaint with OSHA, then they're required to. So if you think there's a whole body of people out there looking out for these working people, no. They don't have the people, quite frankly. You want small government, this is what you get.